One of the most important skills in coaching is knowing what to work on and what to ignore. Most swimmers have a lot of skills to work on, and by knowing what to work on, you're much more likely to get the results that you're looking for. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. A great question I recently received is what to look for first. So this coach mentioned that particularly younger swimmers make a lot of different mistakes, and it's pointless to just bombard them with tons of different cues, tons of different skills that they need to work on. So his question was, how do you prioritize what you work on and what you don't work on? And unless you're working with the best of the best, this is going to be your reality. Regardless of their age, most of the time, regardless of their skill level, you're going to be dealing with lots of different weaknesses, lots of different areas to improve, and lots of different opportunities for improvement. And as this coach mentioned, focus is a key aspect of getting the changes that you want. Rather than trying to work on everything, I usually just focus on one thing at a time, one set at a time, and sometimes even one practice at a time to really enforce and reinforce what's important so that swimmers actually create change. There's no point in trying to change 20 different things if none of them actually change. I'd much rather just focus on one thing and make sure it's actually improved than worry about multiple things and run the chance that none of them improve. So as hard as it can be to focus is usually the one thing that almost always will ensure that you actually get the changes you want. So with that in mind, here's what I look for and the order in which I look for it. We're going to go through several different skills, and the younger swimmers are, the more likely it is that they're going to make these initial mistakes. Each skill I mention is foundational to the next skill, and so the younger the swimmers are, the more likely it is that they're making these foundational mistakes. And then the older the swimmers are, the more skilled they are, the more likely it is that they're making mistakes that are further down the line. However, even in those swimmers, it can be useful to work on every aspect over the course of a season, over the course of a year, because swimmers tend to be making maybe not as many mistakes, but they're still making mistakes across the whole spectrum of different skills. So try to keep that in mind when I go through this list in terms of the athletes that you're actually working with. The younger the swimmers are, the more likely it is they're making some of these initial mistakes. And the older and the more skilled swimmers are, the more likely it is that they need to focus on some of the later mistakes that I mentioned. So number one is comfort in the water. This is the foundation that swimmers need to have in order to execute any good skills. If they're not comfortable in the water, they're not going to be able to establish great alignment, they're not going to be able to create propulsion, and they're not going to be able to swim with great timing. There's no comfort, there's no chance. These swimmers can't relax, they're going to be really inefficient in the water, and if they can't get comfortable in the water, they're not going to be able to establish great alignment. And if they don't have stability, they're going to be moving all over the place. You need stability in order to start using the arms and the legs effectively. So again, comfort is really foundational. You can't have great timing if you don't have great alignment, you don't have great propulsion. If the pieces aren't there, you can't put them together for great timing. So for all swimmers, this is what I'm looking for first. If I get the sense that they're not comfortable in the water, they don't have a good base of stability, this is the first skill that I'm going to focus on because everything is built upon it. So how do you know if a swimmer is not comfortable or they potentially lack stability? If they're really young and they're just getting started, you can assume that they're not really good at this skill. Other than that though, if swimmers are really inefficient, they get really tired really fast and not for any particular reason, that's a good sign that they're not comfortable in the water. If they just look really rigid, really stiff, all their movements are really spastic almost, that's a good sign that they're not comfortable in the water, they're not relaxed. Another sign is that they can't swim slow. They're so unbalanced, they have to be moving forwards in order to stay stable, in order to stay on the surface. And they also tend to kick a lot because, again, they're trying to use the legs to create stability. If you ask them to not kick, they can't do it because they feel like they're going to sink. They feel like they're going to lose control of their stroke. And maybe one of the best signs is everything just looks hard. Again, they can't relax. It's going to be really inefficient, and they're going to have to just work too hard to do anything, and that's usually a sign that they're just not comfortable in the water. To me, this is the foundational skill, and if swimmers lack it, this is the first thing that I'm looking for and the first thing I'm looking to change, because if it's not there, it makes everything else a lot more difficult. So if there's problems here, that's where I'm going to focus on first. Next up is alignment. So let's assume that swimmers are relatively comfortable in the water. Well, they need to use that comfort. They need to start swimming straight. So if they're up and down, they're swimming at an angle, they're moving side to side, those are all problems that need to be addressed because swimming in that way takes so much more energy than just swimming straight. And so everything is going to be harder. Everything is going to be more difficult if they're not in good alignment. The great thing about improving alignment is that it's free speed. If swimmers want to improve their propulsion, it costs more energy to move more water, but if swimmers can swim straighter through the water, everything is easier. And so they can go faster for less effort, which is definitely a great thing. Another positive about improving alignment is, especially at basic alignment skills, they're not particularly difficult to improve. It's not that hard to get swimmers to swim straight. It's not that hard to have them swim in alignment and keep everything level on the surface of the water. So you get really big improvements in speed because it's so much easier and they're creating so much less resistance, and it's a lot less effort. So if swimmers are moving all over the place, they're moving up and down, that's the next step that I'm going to take because it can make everything else they do a whole lot easier. Another underappreciated consequence of poor alignment is that if the body's not in the right position, it's moving side to side, it's moving up and down, it's way more difficult to create propulsion with the arms. And if swimmers can't create propulsion with the arms, they're not going to go anywhere. So trying to fix propulsion when there's an alignment issue, for instance, if a swimmer's swimming freestyle and their head's moving all over the place, guess what? Their arms are probably going to be moving all over the place. And if you just tell swimmers to keep their arms still, they're not going to be able to do it because their body's moving. So if you can improve their alignment, a lot of times it becomes easier to improve their ability to create propulsion. That leads us to our next skill that I'm looking for, and that's propulsion. If they've got great alignment, it's going to make it easier to swim, but they still need to create propulsion to move themselves forward. Whether that's with the arms or the legs, it doesn't really matter, but that skill needs to be in place in order to create speed. Great alignment allows for great speed, but propulsion is necessary in order to create that speed. So what I'm looking for is, in a general sense, can they use their arms relatively effectively in order to create propulsion? So are they pulling relatively straight back? Do they have relatively good surface area? Or are they just kind of sculling back and forth, dropping their elbows? They're almost just waving their hands around. Well, that's an indication that they don't have really great skills with creating propulsion with their arms. Same thing with the legs. They're just kind of moving randomly regardless of the kicking style. That's an indication that they need to learn how to use the legs more effectively in order to create propulsion. From a general standpoint, having them use different hand postures like closed fist, like horns, like OK signs, use different paddles, wear the paddles, hold the paddles upside down, pinch the paddles, strategies like that, sculling, using particular drills, using different resistance skills. Working on the basic skill of creating propulsion with the upper body is going to be valuable regardless of the stroke that they swim. So if that's an issue, as much as possible, put them in positions where they can learn that skill quickly. Next up is timing. And so once they have the basic movements, they can swim with solid alignment, they can use the arms, they can use the legs to create propulsion. They have to get better at doing the right thing at the right time to make it work all together. They don't have to be experts in alignment and propulsion in order to start working on timing. Once they have the basics, it's important to start working on that skill because as swimmers continue to improve their alignment, continue to improve their propulsion, they're going to have to make subtle changes in timing. So you always want to be working on that because it can improve over time and it can change over time, and swimmers are always going to have to be working on that skill. So while timing is probably the last piece, the last component that really needs to be addressed, once swimmers do have the basics, it's important to start addressing timing, even if it's not the primary focus. And so even just spending a couple minutes, a couple times a week can be valuable to help swimmers learn how to put all the pieces together, because that's ultimately what fast swimming comes from, is being able to fluidly swim with great rhythm, and that comes from timing. So first and foremost, working on comfort in the water is key, and that's the first thing I'm checking on, the first thing I'm making sure that's in track, because if it's not, it makes everything else a whole lot more difficult to improve. Once that skill is solid, improving alignment is really key because it makes swimming a whole lot more efficient. Swimmers don't need to use as much energy to move forward, and that makes every other skill a lot easier to learn because swimmers can simply do more swimming because it's not as hard. Then swimmers need to learn how to create propulsion. They need to find ways to move themselves forward effectively and efficiently. And finally, they need to learn how to put it all together. And so I'm always looking on skills in that basic order. If there's a major problem at any step, that's where I'm going to place my focus and make sure that I clean up that step till it's at a good enough level so that I can still work on those other skills. And whenever I identify an opportunity, I focus on that, I focus on what's important, and then I ignore everything else. This can be really hard to do, but the better you get at ignoring other skills that you're not going to work on, the better you get at improving the skills that you do want to work on. The old saying, chase two rabbits, catch none, applies here, but at the same time, the saying, kill two birds with one stone, also applies. And an example would be, if you improve alignment, sometimes you can improve propulsion just because swimmers are swimming straight. So when you work on some of these lower skills, they can actually improve some of the later skills because the swimmers have a better foundation. Once you've established a baseline with all these skills and they're at a competent level, they're good enough, then you can kind of rotate through and focus on different skills at different times, bringing them up and then moving on to the next skill. As you do so, their skills are going to keep leveling up and they're going to keep making progress. But again, it's important to stay focused on whatever you're trying to improve. Just remember, you got to focus on those initial skills first, or you're building a house on a foundation of sand. For some ideas about how to use floating to establish comfort in the water and backstroke, check out the video here.